Okay, so let's picture this. A massive continent, just teeming with hundreds of different nations, each with its own incredible history, its own culture, and then, one day, ships appear on the horizon. And on those ships are people from a world that couldn't be more different. This isn't the story of the beginning of America. Nope. This is the story of a collision that would change the course of human history forever.
And a picture like this, well, it freezes a single moment in time, right? A first meeting. You see maybe some trade, some curiosity. But what this picture doesn't show is everything that comes next. What really happens when one world's ambition to expand just crashes head-on into another's ancient way of life?
So to really get this story, we first have to rewind. We need to see the continent as it actually was. Not some empty wilderness, but a land that was absolutely vibrant, with people, with culture, and with a deep, deep history.
Yeah, you could just forget that monolithic idea of the Native American. Before a single European ship ever hit the shore, this continent was this incredible mosaic of cultures. I mean, look at this map. We're talking about hundreds of distinct nations, something like 1,000 different languages, millions of people whose lives were as different from each other as, say, a Roman was from a Viking. It was just that diverse.
And these societies were true masters of their environments. Up in the sprawling forests of the Northeast, you had the Haudenosaunee building these massive longhouses where entire communities lived together under one roof. Then you go further south, into the heat of the Southeast, and the Creek are conducting their politics inside these cool, dark, windowless council houses made of mud. Every single structure tells a story of brilliant adaptation. And hey, don't make the mistake of thinking this was all just simple tribal life. We are looking at incredibly sophisticated political systems. Take the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, for example. This was a powerful union of nations that functioned a lot like a representative government does today. But here's the really radical part, especially for that time. Women held the real political power. They were the ones who appointed the male leaders. Now that's a concept that was completely alien to the patriarchal European societies that were about to show up. And as you move west, the land just dictates everything. On the vast Great Plains, life flowed with the rhythm of the buffalo hunt. It was the center of their universe. Out in the sun-baked Southwest, the Pueblo peoples carved entire cities right out of the cliffs and the earth. And the Navajo, who were relative newcomers to that region, they translated their entire worldview into these stunning, intricate patterns in their weaving. Every culture was a unique answer to the fundamental question, how do we live here? And this incredible artistry was just everywhere, from the detailed baskets of the far west to the towering totem poles of the northwest coast. And these weren't just decorations. They were history books carved in wood. Seriously. Each figure on a totem pole is like a chapter in a family story, a living record of their lineage and their place in the cosmos. Okay, so we have this vibrant, unbelievably complex world thriving in North America. But meanwhile, 3,000 miles across the Atlantic, another world was stirring, and it was driven by ambitions that would soon send it crashing right into this one. So, what was that driving force?
Well, it all started with breed and flavor. See, in 15th century Europe, spices like pepper and cloves were literally worth more than gold. They were the key to preserving food and, let's be honest, making a pretty bland diet taste good. The problem was, the overland trade routes from Asia were slow and controlled by their rivals. So, nations like Portugal began this frantic search for a new path, a sea route to get their hands on the riches of the East.
Now, you gotta remember, venturing out into the unknown Atlantic, that was terrifying stuff back then. But what made it possible was a revolution in technology. These new ships, like the Caravel, could finally sail effectively against the wind. That was a total game changer. And new tools, like the astrolabe, let sailors navigate by the stars. For the first time ever, they could leave the safety of the coast and really push out into the deep open ocean.
So this new age of exploration gives rise to a bold, and what a lot of people thought was a crazy idea from a guy named Christopher Columbus. He argued that since the world was round, he could reach the east by sailing west, a shortcut. After years and years of getting rejected, he finally convinces the Spanish monarchy to fund his high-stakes gamble. And in October 1492, his gamble paid off, or so he thought. He made landfall completely and utterly convinced he was somewhere in Asia.
But for the people he actually met, the Taino people of the Caribbean, this wasn't a discovery, it was an invasion. And the historical record is brutally clear on this. Columbus's arrival unleashed a wave of unimaginable cruelty, enslavement, and just utter devastation upon the indigenous population.
I mean, the sheer arrogance of it is just staggering. Just 2 years after Columbus's voyage, Spain and Portugal sat down and, with the Pope's blessing, they literally drew a line down the center of the globe. Everything to the west, Spain's to conquer. Everything to the east, Portugal's. Just like that. 2 European kingdoms claimed ownership of the entire world, with absolutely zero regard for the millions of people who already called those lands home.
So, Columbus's voyages didn't just open a new route, they opened the floodgates. All of a sudden, a wave of European adventurers, soldiers, and missionaries starts pouring across the Atlantic, all of them looking for some combination of gold, God, and glory.
And let's be really clear about what the ultimate goal was here. This was not about mapping new lands for the sake of knowledge. This was about colonization. It's the act of taking control of a land, its resources, and its people, all for the benefit of the country doing the colonizing.
Just look at the speed and the scale of this invasion. It's wild. Within just a few decades, European explorers had fanned out all across the continent. You had the Spanish pushing up from the south, hunting for cities of gold. The French were probing the great rivers of the north, still looking for that passage to Asia. And the English began staking their claim along the Atlantic coast. Every single line on this map represents a new intrusion into a world that had existed for thousands of years. Now, the Spanish, they didn't come to trade. They came to conquer. Their soldiers, the conquistadors, were ruthless and chillingly efficient. With just shocking speed, Hernán Cortés shattered the mighty Aztec Empire, and Francisco Pizarro crushed the Inca in South America. They melted down priceless works of art for their gold, they destroyed entire cities, and they forced the survivors into brutal slavery in the silver mines. So, this initial phase of just violent contact, it quickly shifted into something more permanent. European powers started to establish actual colonies, and in doing so, they forever changed the face of the continent and the lives of every single person living on it.
Of course, Spain's rivals were not going to be left out of this. The French, the Dutch, the English, they quickly established their own footholds. But up in the colder northern climates, there wasn't any gold to be found. Instead, they discovered a different kind of treasure, fur. The insatiable European demand for beaver hats fueled the economies of colonies like Quebec and New Amsterdam. And it forced these newcomers into a really complex and often dangerous relationship with the indigenous nations who actually controlled the supply. You know, the story of these early interactions is complicated, it's messy. For sure, there were moments of cooperation, of trade, even alliances. Some indigenous nations saw the Europeans as potential partners against their own old rivals. But there was also immediate, brutal violence right from the get-go. But here's the unavoidable truth. Whether the first contact was a handshake or a gunshot, the ultimate outcome was always the same. Over time, every single European power engaged in the systematic and relentless removal of indigenous peoples from their land.
So I think most of us grew up with this story, right? The one depicted right here. The first Thanksgiving. It's that tale of friendship, where the Wampanoag people helped the struggling pilgrims survive, and then they all celebrated the harvest together. But that peaceful image? It's really a comforting myth. As this slide points out, historians now argue that this story was pretty much created to paper over a much, much darker reality. It conveniently leaves out the decades of bloody conflict, the broken treaties, and the violent conquest that really define the relationship between settlers and indigenous peoples for centuries to come. So, at the end of the day, this was not the discovery of a new world. It was the violent collision of two very old ones. A collision that created our modern world, yes, but also left a legacy of conflict and inequality that we are still dealing with. The echoes of that first encounter, they're all around us. They're embedded in our laws, our land, our very identity. And it leaves us with this profound question we're still trying to answer today. How do the echoes of this first collision still define America?